Hello, welcome to Plugged In. This week, we dive into the fierce immigration debate in the United States. We are live on Facebook at Voice America, and we want your comments and questions. At issue, a months-long initiative by the Trump administration of what it calls a zero-tolerance policy at the U.S. border that has resulted in separating children from their parents upon crossing the U.S. border illegally. Photographs of children clutching their parents or being housed in detention centers are tugging at the heartstrings of many Americans. The Customs and Border Protection Service released these photos to show how the separated children were being housed and treated. The policy has been roundly criticized, including many in President Trump's own party. The president went to Capitol Hill to urge Republicans to fix the nation's immigration system. But before going to Capitol Hill to urge members of Congress from his Republican Party to pass new legislation to deal with this border crisis, President Trump stated his thoughts on the issue.
Most illegal immigrant families and minors from Central America who arrive unlawfully at the border cannot be detained together or removed together, only released. These are crippling loopholes that cause family separation, which we don't want. As a result of these loopholes, roughly 500,000 illegal immigrant family units and minors from Central America have been released into the United States since 2014 at unbelievably great taxpayer expense. Under current law, we have only two policy options to respond to this massive crisis. We can either release all illegal immigrant families and minors who show up at the border from Central America, or we can arrest the adults for the federal crime of illegal entry. Those are the only two options: totally open borders or criminal prosecution for lawbreaking. And you want to be able to do that. We don't want people pouring into our country. We want them to come in through the process, through the legal system, and we want ultimately a merit-based system where people come in based on merit. We want to solve this problem. We want to solve family separation. I don't want children taken away from parents. And when you prosecute the parents for coming in illegally, which should happen, you have to take the children away. Now, we don't have to prosecute them, but then we're not prosecuting them for coming in illegally. That's not good. We want to end the border crisis by finally giving us the legal authorities and the resources to detain and remove illegal immigrant families altogether and bring them back to their country. We have to bring them back to their country.
Congressional Republicans are considering the president's charge to them. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. But first, I want to take you to South Texas, near the border with Mexico. VOA's Ramon Taylor is there where the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy is being carried out. Ramon, where have you been and who have you talked to?
Thank you, Greta. We've been roaming around town here where, as you can imagine, it's a media circus. This is the epicenter of the debate on separated children, where distress is really running at a very visceral level. So you can imagine some of the heartbreaking comments that we've heard from some of the families that we've spoken to who have gotten out and considered to be lucky in this case, where, on the other hand, we know that many more have not received the same treatment, and that's a story that we're following here today.
Ramon, tell me, these people are coming from Central America, from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and they're traveling up through Mexico. Why don't they stop in Mexico? Because that's been some of the criticism, that they make their way all through Mexico and to the U.S. border. Why do they go out of the way of the United States?
Well, there's this conception, some would say misconception, that Mexico is a safe third country, and that is one of the debates that this administration has had as well. Are these families safer by stopping in Mexico, or will they receive the same is there the same fear of violence that many of them have fled from in the first place, gang violence and such? So for a lot of them, it's a matter of life or death until they reach this border, and that's why there's really no stopping for many of them. Others, of course, have made the decision to stop, and sometimes that's out of their own personal safety concerns as well, knowing that this is such a dangerous trek. The Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy places anyone who crossed illegally at risk of detention, including asylum seekers and parents of minors. Since children cannot be held in detention centers, they are separated from their parents, with no word on when or how they might be reunited. Still, migrant families continue to take their chances. In speaking with families here in McAllen, Texas, there is a common thread between their stories. No matter how dreadful the circumstances may be here, the alternative, they say, is worse.
This young man, he made me cry. The tears came out of my eyes because he said, we came down here because they wanted to put my daughter to be a prostitute. They came knocking on his door.
A mother
that has a kid that is suffering. Nothing will stop her from saving her son. It doesn't matter what we do here, unfortunately, where children suffer in order to tempt mothers to stop coming. But if her son is suffering, it's a huge risk. But they're going to save their children if they can.
Parents charged with illegal entry are processed and sent to a detention center, while their children are separated and sent to federal foster care facilities. Attorney Michael Avenatti describes his interactions with some of those mothers.
Every mother that described having their child taken from them stated that they had been lied to when the child was taken from them. At no point in time did anyone with ICE or anyone else tell the mother what was really going on, namely that they were taking the children from them, and it would be days, weeks, and months before they saw them again.
Sister Norma Pimentel calls families that entered the United States illegally but have not been separated the lucky ones. A discretionary decision among Border Patrol chiefs, sometimes out of the sheer volume at detention centers, to allow some families to prove credible fear and seek asylum. But even among families that were not separated, fear has infiltrated through stories of others.
I heard various women say that a girl had supposedly been brought to a court, and they brought her there for 36 hours, except they didn't take her where they had said, but to a jail. And when she arrived, her son wasn't there anymore.
Franklin Graham and other evangelical leaders have come out against this policy in very strong terms, so we're going to be following some of that angle, the religious leaders here in South Texas, and of course we'll be continuing to ask the very important question of when and how these families might be reunified.
Ramon, thank you. Joining me to help put the politics of immigration into perspective is Victoria Maki, VOA's immigration reporter. Nice to see you.
Great, thanks for having me.
Okay, so what are these numbers? How many people are coming in?
So as of yesterday, DHS and HHS, which have been handling this, two agencies that have been handling this, kind of gave us the latest numbers. Now, those were from May until June, early June, so about a month worth. And there were 2,342 children who were taken into custody by Health and Human Services.
What ages about?
Ages, I mean, these are technically up to 18 years old. Now, in previous years, unaccompanied minors, according to the federal data, are generally older, like 13 and above, but that's been increasing. The number that's 13 and below has been increasing over the last 4 or 5 years. Used to be about 11%, now it's about 17% for the last fiscal year.
All right. Before the zero tolerance policy was announced by Attorney General Sessions on behalf of the Trump administration, implemented in May, were there less people coming in or more people coming in, and what's the difference?
So it's really fluctuated from year to year. We saw a surge of families and unaccompanied minors down on the southwest border in 2014, for example. So in any given year, depending on a lot of variables, that number can change. What we're seeing now is more families being separated because of this zero tolerance policy. So the parents are being immediately detained and put into proceedings, both for criminal prosecution for entering illegally and deportation proceedings, while the children are kind of on their own path. And that's the number we're talking about, the 2,342 in the last month or month and a half.
And how did the Obama administration handle this differently?
It was a little different. They relied a bit more on family facilities, and they built, I believe, 2 facilities, one in Karnes, Texas, during the surge in 2014 of younger border crossers. So there was a lot less separation. There was more of an inclination to process the undocumented border crossers, but give them a notice to appear. So they weren't being immediately detained. They were just being told, you have to show up for immigration court or criminal court at a certain point.
Did they, though? I mean, did they show up? I mean, if you got detained at the border and given a notice to appear later for a hearing on it, and you weren't detained, did people show up for these hearings? Largely, yes. The last number I saw was, I think, 2/3 of people did show up for those hearings. And in terms of this the question I asked Ramon is that one of the thoughts is that, the people are traveling, escaping horrible situation in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, making their way all the way through Mexico to the border of the United States. Why are they traveling all the way through Mexico? Is Mexico, considered as dangerous as the Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador? I certainly think there's two situations, right? Mexico, not necessarily always the most hospitable place, especially for migrants, in terms of both jobs and security. But in a lot of cases, especially with the migrants that I've talked to and reported on over the years, in a lot of cases, they're trying to reunite with family members, whether that's a partner, whether it's a parent, whether it's children who came over by themselves. Like, they are actually attempting to reunify their families here in the U.S. And I think that's why you get a lot of people who are trying to ultimately get up here. Victoria, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. There's a generation of undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States by their parents illegally, but they have grown up here in the United States and are Americans in every other way, but legally. They are known as Dreamers, named after the 2001 DREAM Act proposal that tried to grant them legal recognition and a path to citizenship. That law did not pass. Now, 11 years later, in 2012, President Obama signed an executive order, not a law, giving Dreamers an opportunity to postpone deportation hearings and obtain a U.S. work permit. That new policy, called DACA, and it was then expanded 2 years later in 2014, bringing hundreds of thousands of Dreamers out of the shadows and into schools and jobs. In 2017, the new president, President Donald Trump, rescinded President Obama's order, stating instead that the Dreamers are in the United States illegally, breaking the law, and hurting the native-born American workforce. Among those caught in the middle of this fight is Lizia Dalla, brought by her parents to the United States at age 6.
So I'm a DACA recipient. My family and I moved to the U.S. 22 years ago from Canada when I was 6 years old. And during my junior year of college, I received a letter in the mail from the Department of Homeland Security. And it was a notice to appear in immigration court, which is basically the first step in the deportation process. I had no idea that I was undocumented until I received that letter. I was completely blindsided by the fact that I was undocumented. I mean, I grew up just as American as anyone else, playing soccer and being on the debate team in high school, and I just lived a completely normal life. And so when I learned I was undocumented, this was before DACA, and so I didn't really tell anybody. I was always told that it's something that you should keep close and keep as a secret, and during that whole time, my parents were still trying to navigate the immigration system and still meeting with lawyers, still paying application fees and trying to fix things. And shortly after, I told some close friends, and after DACA was announced, that's sort of what really empowered me to come out and become more vocal and talk about this publicly, because I realized at the time that it wasn't just me who was experiencing this. There were 800,000 people like me who all came to this country when they were kids. Some of them were just a few days old. And more broadly, there are about 12 million people who are here, who are undocumented, who have lived in this country for an average of at least 14 years, who are still trying to become documented. And so I realized that this is a larger issue that impacts so many more people than the population of LA and New York City combined. That's how many people are undocumented in this country, and that's why I think we need to find a solution for them, because they've been here for a really long time. We've been contributing for literally decades, and at this moment there's nothing that we can do to be able to adjust our status and fix this issue. My family and I moved here in October of 1996, and if I was deported, I would be forced to go back to Canada, where I virtually have no memory of. When I think of the prospect of getting deported to a country that I don't remember, I don't think about being detained or shackled and put on a plane and forced to buy a plane ticket to a completely foreign place. I think about all of the things that I would be leaving behind. I think about my friends whose weddings I would miss. I think about the future nieces and nephews that I would never get to meet. I think of all of the funerals of people who and the births and the family weddings and the milestones that I would just miss by not being able to be here. I think when we hear things about family separation, it's really terrifying because I can't imagine life anywhere else but here. I don't know any other country. When I was in college, I studied journalism and political science, and I literally can't even spell words correctly in Canada. And when I studied political science, that's American government and politics. So I think for many of us, the trajectory of our life was built to be able to contribute here and to do our work here. And the prospect of being sent somewhere else over a missing sheet of paper just seems completely senseless. I think it's time. I think we're long overdue for some kind of protections for people who have been here, who are contributing, who are giving back. I think that as a country, we should be prioritizing families and keeping families together. And so many of the policies that we have seen emerge recently from this administration are going to tear a lot of people apart. We've got mothers now at the border who are literally having their children ripped away from them, who are being told that their kids are going to take baths and then their kids go disappearing for months. It's not what we stand for, and it's not something we should stand for. The majority of the American people are actually with Dreamers. More than 90% of them want Dreamers to stay. They want us to be able to earn permanent solutions and permanent protections. And so I think, what I would say to them is call your member of Congress and keep putting pressure on them. I think for a lot of people, calling your member of Congress feels not as impactful, but it really matters. And there is no time more critical than now to pick up the phone and call your legislator and demand a solution, because what we're seeing Dreamers get deported. I think what we need to do is create a smarter immigration system where we're keeping families together. I don't have a perfect answer as to what needs to happen and what that looks like, but I think at the very least what we can all agree on and what all Americans agree on is that the families should be able to stay together, and it's completely wrong that we would be taking little kids and little infants and tearing them away from their mothers.
President Trump is charging Congress with the job of passing a bill to fix the U.S. immigration system, including the separation of children from their families at the border. Catherine Gibson joins me. She is VOA's congressional correspondent. And Catherine, besides, I want to know what the president said to the Republicans about immigration. We're talking about two things: DACA, which are people who were brought here unbeknownst by their parents illegally years ago, and those who want to come to the United States for the first time, which is what we're seeing at the border.
Exactly, Greta. So that stress and frustration that you heard Ramon Taylor talk about down at the U.S.-Mexico border, that's also up here on Capitol Hill. And I saw it on display Tuesday night when President Trump came up here to talk to House Republicans and try to rally support for that immigration bill that is so-called the compromise bill, the House GOP leadership bill, a number of things. But at the bottom of it, it's based on President Trump's own 4 pillars for immigration.
3,000 kilometers from the detention camps that have sparked national outrage. Frustration in Washington.
And you guys are lying about it.
Democrats confronting Republicans after the president inaccurately blamed them for the separation of immigrant families at the U.S. border. A problem the president said could be fixed.
We have one chance to get it right. We might as well get it right, or let's just keep it going. But let's do it right. We have a chance. We want to solve this problem. We want to solve family separation.
But after a confusing week when he initially appeared not to support legislation based on his own 4-pillar immigration plan, Republicans want assurances Trump will sign what they send him.
He was very clear that he was going to support that bill. He said he was with the conference 1,000%.
That bill increasing border security funding while providing a pathway for permanent residency for the young undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children would also end the separation of parents and children, Republican leadership said.
The bill that we worked on with the president does just that. It fixes that problem.
Democrats say that's completely false.
And now to try to sell this, that we have bills that can come to the floor that would end family separation by incarcerating families in brand new prisons.
Lawmakers will have the opportunity to decide if the bills do enough to solve the family separation problem this Thursday, when the immigration bills are set for a vote.
So you heard there that the Republicans have inserted new language into that immigration bill that'll come up for a vote this week that would provide additional funding for the Department of Homeland Security to build facilities that would house parents and children together. Now that's new language now that this controversy has grown over this week. You heard the Democrats say there that that's still not enough, that all you're doing is building prisons to house the families together.
Catherine, thank you. Well, last year, 69 million people worldwide were forcibly displaced by war, violence, and persecution. 2017 was the 5th year in a row that the number of refugees has increased. For World Refugee Day, the United Nations released new statistics that shows that just last year, more than 16 million people became newly displaced. Managing the migration of displaced people is the job of the International Organization for Migration. Ken Isaacs is the U.S. nominee to head the UN organization, and we spoke to him about the enormous challenges facing refugees and those who want to help them.
A refugee would be defined as somebody who's crossed an international boundary, and there are about 4 or 5 different questions that they would be asked. Are you being persecuted, or is your life at risk because of your political views or your religion or your ethnicity, those type of things. And if they're determined to be qualified as receiving asylum, then they're officially then a refugee, and they would come under the protection mandate of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees.
What rights do migrants have?
So migrants would enjoy the same human rights that you do in any country. This is technically where they would stand. They don't, just because you're moving somewhere in the world doesn't mean that you suddenly don't have your rights.
So what rights do the countries have as migrants want to move into them?
This is a good question. So when you look at migration, there's, let's say, the issue of human rights, and there's the issue of states' rights. So the Constitution of IOM recognizes the human rights of individuals, but it also recognizes the sovereign rights of states to develop their own domestic migration policy. So IOM works in the middle of that area to make it as smooth as possible to facilitate migration in what is called safe, orderly, and regular.
Is it fair to say in shorthand that you're trying to work out the problems between the people migrating and the states where the migrants are? Is
yes.
that a shorthand, easy way to say it?
Yes,
because,
you want to
because there's a conflict there many times.
Well, there could be. When it's irregular. Irregular means legal or illegal. Is there a legal pathway or not? So if you look back in what happened in 2015 and 2016 with so many people came over from Turkey, that wasn't safe, it wasn't orderly, and it wasn't regular. And the Europeans opened up their heart, they accepted a lot of people, and there's political fallout today. There's social fallout today, and that's because it wasn't safe, it wasn't orderly, and it wasn't regular, so they're having to deal with all of that now.
All right, some places it's just absolutely atrocious. I read recently about there have been lots of deaths of migrants in the Mediterranean, for instance. I read the number, I think, this year, 2018, and we're just into June, there's more than 650 have died in trying to migrate, and they drown in the Mediterranean. Does that come under your purview at all, the IOM? Does it have any role in trying to make that safe?
Yes, IOM does have a role in trying to help states make migration safe. So, but you bring up a good subject. What would drive somebody to cross the desert and then try to cross the sea in a rubber raft with 100 or 200 or 300 other people in it and overcrowded and risk their lives? I read somewhere that about 1 out of every 29 people crossing the Mediterranean die. So what is so bad at their home? That's a rhetorical question, but it does beg further analysis into what are the drivers of migration. Is it opportunity? Is it security? What is it? And I think that if the world wants to create a safe environment, they need to reduce the drivers of migration so that people don't take risk with their lives.
Just a note for full disclosure, Ken Isaacs is a personal friend of mine, and I, along with others, including Nick Kristof of the New York Times, have advocated for his election as director of the IOM. That election will be held on June 29th. Now, Ken and I also discussed the controversy about his tweets, and you can watch the entire interview on voanews.com and search Plugged In. That's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice of America. You can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And follow me on Twitter. It's @Greta. Follow me on Twitter. Thanks for being plugged in.
I'm Jim Malone, and I work the political beat. I cover what drives the political issues in the United States, what voters think, what drives the candidates, how public opinion shifts on one issue or another. It keeps you in touch with the American people and where they want the country to go. It's a great way to get a window on what's happening in the United States. I'm Jim Malone, and my beat is U.S. politics.
My name's Carla Babb, and I work the Pentagon beat. That access helps me to do better stories. Every day it's my responsibility to collect all of the defense news. It keeps our VOA viewers informed. I get to travel all across the globe. Anything that's defense related and how to protect and keep people safe, that's where I'll go. So it's never a dull moment at the Pentagon. My name is Carla Babb. This is my beat.
I'm Roger Muntu. I've been a VOA for about 4 years. First of all, I wanted to become a broadcaster. That was the idea. But my parents, where I was growing up in the DRC, thought that that was not a good idea because it was not a well-paid job. When I came to the US, I was like, you know what? Now I'm living here on my own, so I can do whatever I want. The only way for me to get to broadcasting is to start by building my own studio. I loved music since I was a kid. Creating my own stuff is like building your own house. I did some acting in high school. So my acting came back and they started calling me to audition me, which I went and auditioned. They're like, oh my God, you're an actor. At VOA, I do radio, but I also do TV. We deal with social issues. We debate a subject every week. People in different countries in Africa can call and express their opinion. VOA really humbles me. It gives me a sense of understanding the world in that one building. You can't get that anywhere.
I'm Jim Malone, and I work the political beat. I cover what drives the political issues in the United States, what voters think, what drives the candidates, how public opinion shifts on one issue or another. It keeps you in touch with the American people and where they want the country to go. It's a great way to get a window on what's happening in the United States. I'm Jim Malone, and my beat is U.S. politics.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is National Security.
My name is Eva Marcan. I started working at VOA in 1998. We're originally from former Yugoslavia, so we moved to America right when the war started. In 91, when I came here, in class I would always spend a lot of time doodling with wall art, graffiti. It opened up the door to exploration for a teenager, but you can definitely come out and do a piece like this or do a piece like this, and it would be recognized, and you also tell a story through it. I connect art with journalism because it's a story that changes, and it's not just a view, it's not just a personal perspective, it's a story, and it's a story to be told, and that's it.